This rather imposing structure in the graphic is the Menin Gate. It's located outside the small town of Ypres in western Belgium. Its official name is the Menin Gate Memorial to the Missing. It was built in 1927 as a monument to Commonwealth of Great Britain, now Commonwealth of Nations, war dead in World War I between 1914 and 1918. If you know any of the history of World War I, you know that it was a war that really was an unprecedented catastrophe in all of human history when it occurred. And it was started and propelled through 4 bloody years by colossal miscalculation and misunderstanding. And you probably also know that the termination, the armistice, which happened on November 11th, 1918, bred racisms and hatreds that can be traced directly to the start of World War II, which turned out to be an even more colossal global catastrophe. So the Menin Gate stands as a monument. Inside, etched on the walls, in fact, etched on the surfaces all over the gate, are the names of 54,896 Commonwealth of Great Britain soldiers whose bodies were never recovered. That's an extraordinary thought. And in such an imposing monument, in such a ominous purpose, you'd think that they, from time to time, have a ceremony. And they do. It's called the Last Post Ceremony. Normally starts at 8 p.m. when they have it. And it starts like any other ceremony. People assemble in the gate. VIPs and other dignitaries arrive and take their place. Music and anthems are played. Solemn prayers are said. Songs are sung. Short speeches are given. And then wreaths are placed. Wreaths and other memorabilia are placed all over. In fact, by the time it's done, the monument is littered with wreaths. And they're these red poppy wreaths, reminiscent of the poppies of Flanders Field. And at conclusion, solemn honors are rendered to those 54,896 lost souls whose bodies were literally obliterated in the 5 battles of Ypres. Now, what's extraordinary about this is not that they do it, but that they do it every day and have since November 11th, 1928. If you can count the days, that's over 30,000 ceremonies. Joni and I attended one a couple of years ago. It was in the dead of winter. It was on a Tuesday night, and it was raining, and there were hundreds of people there. There were dozens of school children there, most of them involved in, placing the wreaths and the memorials. So I came away from that, and you can't help but come away from, an experience like that, without the feeling that these people have a great abiding appreciation for that history and for the honor that is due those who served and sacrificed in that great catastrophic conflict, and for the military that serves and protects them today. Now, that's not to say that we in the United States stand in anybody's shadow in terms of, how we remember our military past, remember the wars we fought, and the service and sacrifice of our soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines. We have our own hallowed memorials. We have our own sacred ground. We have our own holidays, Memorial Day in late May, Veterans Day in November, early November, and sometimes on the 4th of July. And at other times, we celebrate and honor our military history. And thankfully, we live in an era where appreciation for that history and for our military is at an all-time high. I first put on a military uniform in 1967. I wore it almost every day for 38 years. And I can remember a time when we did not honor our military, and those were painful times. But thankfully, they're well in the past. But there's a deeper issue here. And it's expressed by these headlines gleaned from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine. They describe a growing gap between the military and the civilian population that they serve. This has been a growing concern for some time, this disconnectedness between the military and the rest of the population. Became such a concern that around 2010, the Pew Research Center decided to do a study of it. And when the Pew Research Center takes something on, I mean, they do it big time. They did literally thousands of surveys. They involved hundreds and hundreds of people. They took data from, all kinds of different questions that were asked. And they published a report in 2011 titled The Military-Civilian Gap, War and Sacrifice in the Post-9/11 Era. And I want to share some of the data from that report. This is probably the most important piece of data. It shows participation as percentage of our population in the military from 1900 to 2010. And you can see it's fairly predictable. It shows big spikes in World War I and World War II. In fact, World War II, of course, was where we set a record. Almost 9% of our fellow citizens served in the military. At one time, there were 16 million in uniform, 8 million at any one time on active duty and in the reserves. But as you see in the data, that diminished over time with some ups and downs, but has been steadily decreasing to where today we have 0.5% of our fellow citizens in uniform protecting all the rest of us. If you round that up, that's 1%. That's the title of my talk. I'm talking about that 0.5%. That's a pretty small number when you think about it. The Pew Center looked at demographic data. And this basically says that if you're over the age of 50, there's a 4 out of 5 chance you've got a parent, child, sibling, or spouse. You've got that single degree of separation from somebody who has served. If you're below the age of 30, that drops to 1 in 3. They looked at institutions. This is the United States Congress. Back in the 60s and 70s, if you were a congressman or senator, there was a 3 out of 4 chance at some time you'd been in the military. Today, that's 1 in 5. Sometime, I think it was around 2008, they counted up the number of children among the 535 congressmen and senators, and that number was less than 10. If you know your Constitution, you know that Congress is the branch of our government that is empowered to declare war. They do it very seldomly, but they are the ones that are empowered. And if you were paying attention to the last presidential election, neither candidate in 2012 had military service in their record. You have to go back to the first half of the last century to find a similar circumstance. So on statistical basis alone, we are growing apart from our military. Fewer of us are serving, and the connection, that single degree of separation that I like to call it, is diminishing among those of us in the population of the United States of America. Now, why is this significant? Well, let me explain it this way. We operate on the world stage using our instruments of national power. They're sometimes called our social instruments of national power. I've got the big 3 up here: economic, diplomatic, and military. There may be others. In fact, there are others, but these are generally considered the primary ones. And the point is that participation in the first 2 is relatively benign, fairly risk-free. Participation in the third is anything but. When a young man or woman raises his or her right hand and takes the oath of enlistment, or the oath of office if they're being commissioned as an officer, they essentially write a blank check to all the rest of us, cashable with their life. That's a pretty awesome thought. What we're talking about here is the reality, the consequence of military service. Now, you may be sitting out there saying, well, look, I'm connected. I have a yellow ribbon on the bumper of my car, okay? I made a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project, and I always thank, a service person for their service when I see them in the airport. Well, all those things are good. In fact, they're very good, and we need to keep doing them, lest we fall back into that era where we did not appreciate the service of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. but they're not enough. We're talking about the real consequences of military service, what service and sacrifice really means, what it means to do dangerous, sometimes deadly dangerous missions in faraway places. It also what it means to do long, boring, tedious missions in faraway places. It's about the hardships of military service, about the dislocation, the separation, and everything else that goes with it. Let me give you 3 reasons why this is significant and may be important today and tomorrow. The first is the All-Volunteer Force. For the first roughly 200 years of our history, we filled the ranks of our military with conscription. We call it the draft. That ended on the 1st of July, 1973. We went to the All-Volunteer Force. That was enacted in law. And make no mistake about it, the All-Volunteer Force has delivered to this nation the most awesome military capability, the most awesome military instrument of national power that the world has ever known. There's nobody that's even a close second today. But there's one salient feature of the All-Volunteer Force that needs mentioning, and that is that it was designed as a peacetime force designed to first deter and then fight and win, if deterrence fails, against a large nation-state actor. And that has never happened. If you've been paying attention for the last 10 or 15 years, the all-volunteer military has been at continuous war against usually non-nation-state actors. And that's causing fractures. Those fractures manifest themselves in a whole bunch of different ways. Probably the biggest and most disturbing is the socioeconomic quintiles from which people are actually volunteering to serve. The notion of a rich man's war and a poor man's fight is starting to take on new meaning. And believe it or not, that was one of the reasons why we went away from conscription back in 1973. Other signs of fracture: the need to pay bonuses to get people to enlist and then re-enlist. The need to adjust the standards for education, physical fitness, criminality so that people can join. The widespread use of prescription psychotropic drugs to keep our service people in the fight and allow them to cope with the aftermath of the fight. Add to that veteran homelessness, divorce, drug and alcohol abuse, suicide rate, the wide use of contractors to do the job that the military traditionally does. All these are signs of the stresses on the all-volunteer force. Dennis Leitch, Major General of the United States Air Force, or United States Army Reserve, lives in Columbus. He's a successful retired businessman, served a full career, retired as a general officer in the Army Reserve. He's written a book. It's titled Skin in the Game: Poor Kids and Patriots. And in that book, he takes on this concept of the stresses on the all-volunteer force from the perspective of fairness, efficiency, and sustainability over time, and with tons of data, some of the same data that the Pew Center research yielded, but a lot of other data, objective and anecdotal. He makes a very strong case that it's failing on all 3 counts. And whether he's 100% right or not, there is strong indications that we need to do something about it. What's implied here is that we need to have a national dialogue, a national debate about the all-volunteer force, because it is the absolute bedrock of our national security capability. It is the foundation of our ability to defend ourselves. People first. And that debate, that dialogue, will be better held and better informed by all of us if we have that deeper appreciation for what military service really is. Reason number 2, I call the cost of technology and winning 100-0. Since about World War II, we have had a fairly significant technological edge in our military capability. It's not universal, and it is perishable, but we have relied on that edge. And guess what? As a society, we have become very, very intolerant of battle casualties. We're not willing to send our sons and daughters into combat with the expectation they're going to come back winning 51-49. We have the technological capability in certain domains to allow them to go out and win 100-0. The question becomes, at what cost? It's getting more and more and more expensive. We read about this all the time on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, where some modernization program goes off the charts high in terms of its cost. And these costs compete directly with education, infrastructure, healthcare, social programs, and a lot of other things that we could spend our tax dollars on. So really it becomes a moral question. And that moral question will be better answered, I submit, by a population that truly understands, that is connected to its military. Number 3 is sort of the master reason of them all, and that is the decision to employ our military instrument of national power, the decision to go to war, whether it's a declared war or not. A nation makes no more profound and serious decision than to send its fellow citizens into combat to fight and die. I'm sure you all probably agree with that. And I can't think of anything more contemporaneous. I mean, how many times have we heard in the last 2 or 3 months about this decision to go to war? And once again, our understanding of the realities of military service will better inform us as participants in a representative democracy to make that decision. So what do we do about it? How can we stay connected? Fewer of us are serving. That means fewer of us have that firsthand experience, and fewer of us have that single degree of separation from someone who has had that experience. Well, there are ways to do that. I offer 3 here. One's right down the road. The National Museum of the United States Air Force, a world-class place. On the bottom left of that slide is the Marine Corps Museum at Quantico, Virginia. And on the right, on the bottom, is the soon-to-be-built Ohio Memorial and Museum on the Scioto Peninsula near Cosi in Columbus. These organizations, these places, these institutions are great places to go on a Saturday afternoon and see really cool stuff. But their purpose, their prime mission, is to tell the stories of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, to build that connectedness with those of us who don't serve to those who do. They do it extraordinarily well. The museum, the National Museum of the United States Air Force, their motto is, we are the keepers of their stories. And if you patronize them with that thought in mind, if you listen to those stories, you will start to build that connectedness that I'm talking about. There are organizations. I show the logos up here for the Association of the United States Army, the Navy League, and the Air Force Association. You can join these organizations. Anybody in this room can join for what it costs you to go to Regal Cinema and see a show on a Friday night for a party of 2. Remarkably cheap. And I guarantee you that if you do join, you will have the opportunity to be saturated with information about what it means to be a soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine. In the end, though, it's about this. Serious Civics is a branded term. It was created by Professor Sam Clovis. He's an Air Force Academy class of 1971, classmate of mine. He's a professor at Morningside College. I like this term because it captures the work that we all need to do. Now, you can say we need to do a lot of serious civics about a lot of different things. But what's more important than building and maintaining that connection with the men and women who serve us and protect us? The Menin Gate stands as a memorial to that colossal miscalculation and misunderstanding that led to World War I and subsequently World War II, literally defined the 20th century for all of us. It's a monument to disconnectedness. The people of Great Britain cheered wildly as their brave lads marched off to war in 1914. They cheered their gallantry as they rode on horseback with sabers drawn into the awesome killing power of early 20th century industrial warfare. They had no clue. They had lost luck. They had lost that connection. That was a tragedy. I would hope that we would all pray that we live in a world where we never have to build another Menin Gate. Said differently, that yellow ribbon on your bumper is a good thing and ought to stay there. but we all need to work to stay connected. Thank you very much.